Volkswagen's screw-up on emission testing that could cost them billions. They're accused of cheating on pollution checks. The fear of huge fines prompts a profits warning as VW's market value tumbles.
Our company was dishonest. And in my German words, we've totally screwed up.
Also tonight, fresh clashes in Calais, with Europe's leaders still divided over the refugee crisis.
The seriously injured Afghan veteran vowing to walk again on Remembrance Sunday.
And 60 years on, how ITV changed the face of television news.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Volkswagen's global boss said, "We are endlessly sorry. Their top man in America was more blunt. We've totally screwed up." The world's biggest car maker has admitted cheating on pollution tests and making false claims about its cars. It faces fines running into billions.
11 million diesel cars are involved. Many of them could be here. The Transport Secretary wants a Europe-wide investigation following the American revelations. VW shares have lost more than 30% of their value, as our business editor Joel Hills reports.
A trusted brand caught cheating. Volkswagen builds more cars than any other company, but tonight its reputation looks tarnished, perhaps permanently.
Aren't diesels dirty? Yeah, that's true.
In the United States, VW's diesel engines weren't as clean as advertised. The company designed software that helped cheat tough emissions tests, a decision it's now paying for.
Our company was dishonest with the EPA and the California Air Resources Board and with all of you. And in my German words, we've totally screwed up.
Tonight, the chief executive, under pressure to resign, went further.
Es tut mir unendlich leid.
Martin Winterkorn said he was enormously sorry that they damaged trust in this way. Volkswagen says it will set aside £4.7 billion to cover the cost of recalling and repairing cars and the fines that will surely follow. The company says up to 11 million vehicles may have been affected. The company sold 514,000 cars in the UK last year. Around half were diesel. If you own a VW that's been affected, the company says you'll be contacted by your dealer. Meanwhile, the government has called upon the European Commission to urgently investigate the quality of emissions tests.
We need to know whether the groups testing vehicles here in the UK are truly independent, whether the qualities they tell customers a car has are really correct, and we need to know whether cars are able to operate on the road in the same way as the testers promise.
The industry insists there's no evidence other manufacturers cheat. But skeptics point out that in the last decade, while cars are supposed to have got greener, air quality has barely improved.
We collated information from lots of different real-world driving emissions tests that were being undertaken. Some of those vehicles are producing 10 times the legal limits of nitrogen oxides on the road, and yet these vehicles are passing the tests in a laboratory.
Tonight, shares in VW closed down almost 20% for the second day in a row. A disaster for the company, but the share price of its rivals fell too. This may not be over.
Joel, you say there that the industry claims clean hands, but is Volkswagen the only manufacturer affected?
Well, look at what has happened on the stock markets today. People are selling shares not only in Volkswagen, but also in companies like Fiat, like Renault, like Peugeot. The concern here is that this is much bigger than perhaps people realise. Now, all of those companies say, look, we did not fit the technology that VW did. We didn't try and circumvent the tests and effectively portray our cars as greener than they actually are. Our cars are legit, but the markets there, in some instances, they may be wrong, but they're not taking any chances. The suspicion here is something isn't right, and there are calls for investigations, not just here in Britain, but in France, in Germany, as far away as South Korea. This isn't over by a long shot and could be really, really quite big.
Joel, thank you.
The scale of the financial problems in the NHS were brought into focus today, with the trust that runs one of Britain's most prestigious hospitals being placed into special measures.
Addenbrooke's in Cambridge is losing more than £1 million a week. Now staff shortages are said to be putting patient care at risk. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, reports.
There wasn't much of a welcome today, with Addenbrooke's turning away non-emergency patients because its A&E department can't cope with demand. They won't let the cameras near either, but if you can get inside, the regulator says you can expect outstanding care from its staff, only there aren't enough of them to keep patients safe. When this consultant neuropsychologist raised the same concerns with the trust, it cost him his job.
Well, there was low levels of staffing, there was use of unqualified staff in clinics, there was lack of specialised staff to carry out pre-operative assessments of patients with epilepsy, and so there were these number of concerns about staffing that I had.
The Trust sent us these pictures to show it's taking rapid action to address concerns. It also apologised to patients. The inadequate rating means the regulator can now force out senior management if change isn't speedy enough, but already 2 of them have resigned.
There are 13 other trusts in special measures, but when a hospital of international reputation like this one is judged to be failing, it sounds a health warning across the entire NHS.
Because the financial crisis here is just the tip of an iceberg. Last year, the overspend by NHS trusts reached £818 million, the worst in a decade. This year, 9 out of 10 trusts are predicting they'll end up in the red, all while nearly 3.5 million patients are left queuing on waiting lists, the highest number for 7 years. But one of the country's leading health economists believes there's worse to come.
The predictions this year are for £2,000 million overspending. All the finance directors we talk to on a regular basis indicate that this year is going to be one of the toughest years they've faced.
Remember, it is still only September, but seeing this hospital on the critical list doesn't bode well for the winter ahead. Rachel Younger, ITV News, Cambridge.
Stark divisions emerged in Europe today as ministers agreed on a package of measures which could relocate 120,000 refugees. The urgency of the issue was highlighted by clashes on the Croatian border today, where hundreds of people were attempting to cross from Serbia. Today's relocation plans were opposed, however, by 4 countries, including Hungary, and must now be ratified by EU leaders.
Well, here the British government has confirmed that the first of the Syrian refugees who will be resettled in Britain have arrived. It's been agreed that 20,000 people will be taken in over the next 5 years. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp is at Westminster. Chris, what has the Home Office said about this?
Well, it's in the last half hour or so, Mary, that the Home Office announced the first of these 20,000 or so refugees that David Cameron said that Britain could take have arrived in this country. They won't tell us where they've gone nor how many have arrived. We know it's fewer than 100. It's been described as a modest number, and they've gone to local authorities who have volunteered to take them. Now, of course, as this scheme ramps up, talks are going to have to continue between the government and local authorities about how they pay for it, quite frankly, and how exactly it is going to work. Now, tonight, the French President, Francois Hollande, is meeting David Cameron at his country residence. As we just said, there's been a pretty torrid day in the European Union where they forced through this scheme against the wishes of some countries. But as David Cameron increasingly puts it, we need to deal with the problem at source, he says, because only 3% of those who have been displaced are on the move through Europe, and we need to stop that becoming 4, 5, 6, 7%. Otherwise, there really will be a crisis on Europe's borders.
Chris Shipp in Westminster, thank you.
ITV News today witnessed running battles between police and refugees and migrants in Calais. It is thought the forced removal of some of the camps there sparked it. From Calais, our correspondent Dan Rivers reports.
In the camp they call the jungle, the law was being laid down with force today. After days of building tensions, a small group of migrants decided they'd had enough, pelting the police with rocks and bottles, the French riot squad responding with tear gas and the odd shove. These people all want to get into Britain, and today's migrant deal in Brussels will bring them no closer to their dream, since the UK is not taking part.
Once again, the police have fired tear gas into the jungle. The air down there is now thick with smoke as they try and push the migrants and refugees back further into the camp.
There's a very nasty situation going on at the moment. There's a confrontation between the police and also some of the members of the camp who are really roused up, and their complaints and what they're saying is that they don't like the way that the police came in yesterday and bulldozed people's tents.
He's referring to these scenes yesterday when several hundred mostly Syrian refugees were forced to move their tents. Some were bulldozed by the police in another part of Calais. Today they were repitching them inside the jungle. Many of these people have left camps in Turkey where Britain will now offer some safe passage to the UK. What's your message to David Cameron?
What about us? Just what about us? This is the message.
They have escaped the same war and suffered the same indignities, yet they feel forgotten in this lawless camp where gang violence is common and patience is fast running out. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Calais.
Still to come, bridge, a game or a sport? Why, a High Court judge has been asked to decide. And
here is the news. 60 years on from ITV's first ever broadcast. All those stories, old and new, and more after the break. Welcome back. It's now been nearly a year since British troops withdrew from Afghanistan. But while the war there has ended, there are many veterans here still fighting. Their opponent is not now the Taliban, but the terrible scars, both physical and psychological, that war left behind. Among the thousands who were injured, 275 service personnel have lost limbs. The lifetime cost of caring for those amputees has now been put at £288 million. As part of our Battle Goes On series, Paul Davis met Sergeant Rick Clement, one of the most seriously injured of those soldiers to survive.
By anyone else's definition, Rick Clement is a man amongst men. But he hasn't always seen it that way, after suffering the cruelest of injuries.
Woke up and the news of not just my legs missing, but not being able to have children. When you start thinking like that, I guess you're starting to question what am I living for, I guess.
Rick, a platoon sergeant in the Duke of Lancaster's regiment, stood on a booby-trap bomb 5 years ago. He somehow survived and later married his long-term girlfriend, but the relationship didn't last, and in this remarkably open interview, he admits the difficulty he was having coming to terms with his disability was a factor.
It changed my relationship with my girlfriend and wife at the time, because she was almost my carer as opposed to my wife or girlfriend. She was amazing and so all credit to her, but you know, I felt almost like I was 90 years old at 30.
Rick now lives alone in his specially adapted home in Blackpool, where he keeps a memento of the day that changed his life.
It's done its job and remained fully intact, along with my head.
From here, he runs his own charity, A Soldier's Journey, helping other wounded veterans in memory of 3 friends who did not return from Afghanistan. His work has won national recognition. Now he's set himself a bigger challenge.
Basically, I want to lay a reef at the cenotaph in Blackpool in November, and I want to be able to walk to lay the reef.
That would have been impossible just a few years ago, but advances in prosthetic limbs have given Rick hope, even though one of his amputations was so high he needs a support to do the job of his missing hip. This is pioneering work.
Okay.
It is also exhausting and requires far more body strength than a conventional artificial limb. It takes sweat and a willingness to go through the pain barrier. But step by determined step, life has a new perspective.
This is great, because this is eye to eye, isn't it?
It does, it feels great to be just, you know, eye to eye and look somebody in the face.
Walking unaided by November will take more punishing work. But for this soldier, on his journey, the invaluable prize of winning back self-esteem has already been won. Paul Davis, ITV News, Blackpool.
The Labour peer, who was filmed apparently taking cocaine with prostitutes, will face no further action from police. Lord Sewell stepped down in July after being secretly filmed by the Sun newspaper. Today, the Metropolitan Police said there was insufficient evidence against him.
46 school children and 4 of their teachers have been hospitalised during a trip to Belgium. The pupils were all from a school in Guiseley in West Yorkshire.
And it's being claimed tonight that Chelsea's team doctor, Eva Carneiro, has left the club. She was criticised by the manager, Jose Mourinho, last month over her treatment of one of the team's players.
An argument has been raging in the High Court today over whether the card game bridge should be made a sport. The English Bridge Union says it should be because it exercises the mind and is organised by the Olympic movement. Sport England says it shouldn't and doesn't deserve its funding. Damon Green has more.
A meeting of the Trafford Bridge Club on the outskirts of Manchester. Today's just a practice session, but don't get the idea. This isn't a serious business.
Well done, well played.
Of course, many people like Edwin take up bridge mostly to meet people, but also to stay mentally sharp.
It's a game of memory as much as it is playing the cards, because you've got to remember what has been played, you've got to assess what other people have in their hands for card strength as well.
Sport England, which provides funding to sports but not to games, is being challenged in court over its refusal to acknowledge bridge. It does recognise 148 sports, including football, skiing and surfing, and also some less obvious ones, like angling, rambling and flying model aircraft. Those who want bridge on the list say it's a sport of the mind and is already being considered for the 2020 Olympics. Sport England say, as far as they're concerned, sport means physical activity. The silence at this Tuesday afternoon grudge match in Didsbury tells you just how much is at stake. If bridge becomes a sport, it becomes eligible for the lottery funding more active pursuits already receive.
Bridge operates very much on the shoestring because it's completely self-funded. So if there's more money available, that means there's more money available for people to learn and to participate.
The court hearing in London is set to last 2 days, and by the time this club meets again, they could be playing more than just a game. Damon Green, ITV News, in Manchester.
And finally, 60 years ago tonight, the very first team of ITN journalists was putting the finishing touches on the very first news bulletin to be broadcast on commercial television.
Earlier that day, the channel that was to become ITV was launched, ending the BBC's monopoly. It changed the face of television and of television news forever, as Juliette Bremner reports.
Ready, our friends, you citizens of London. Wish us Godspeed. Over to Guildhall. Good luck all. Here we go. Take it, Master Control.
The words that welcomed audiences to the first permitted rival to the BBC, described as the Antichrist because it was going to show commercials.
It's tingling fresh. It's fresh as ice. It's Gibbs SR toothpaste.
Viewers survived that first exposure to TV selling and got a taste of independent television news. In those early years, there were no fixed bulletins, just a newsreader who talked over pictures.
Good evening. The government is not going to grant...
Even while reporting world events, here in Biafra, there was room for personalities.
10 minutes later, and the Biafrans are having trouble getting their troops to advance from their forward positions.
Sandy Gore was an early recruit who became a household name. He remembers a sense of excitement when he joined in the 60s.
ITN was young and go for it and go ahead, and so on a big story they really had more, I think they had more sort of get up and go than the BBC then, and I think we were better than the BBC, certainly.
It dropped 4 canisters of napalm.
Images that came to define war, children in Vietnam.
The moment Berliners have waited 28 years for.
And chronicled the changing shape of the world. News at 10 was the first bulletin with 2 presenters until Sir Trevor went solo.
I think it's the most terrifying job in the world. To know, after people had associated it with 2 people, to know that you were doing it on your own was frightening.
Through all the twists and turns, there was a trademark sign-off, the "and finally," sending everyone to bed happy. Juliette Bremner, ITV News.
And on our website, itv.com/news, you can watch the first ever ITN bulletin from 1955. Plus, at 10:40 tonight on ITV, there's a special programme. And here is the news, looking back at the last 60 years.
We weren't there then, of course, almost, but not quite. That's all for now. Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham will be here with ITV News at 10.
But from the two of us and the whole team, a very good evening to you.
Bye-bye.